Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. Looks like we have some folks trickling in right now. My name is Carson Kaufman. Great to meet everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and happy Thursday. Today we will be covering ramping, so better, faster, stronger, like that Daft Punk song that was so popular a couple of years ago. Little background about me. As I said, my name is Carson Kaufman. This is the actually first office hours I've done. I'm really excited to be here with everyone. I been at Atrium for about 3.5 years, and I started actually right under our co-founder, Pete. So I was the first AE that Pete hired, and I helped him build out the sales motion over the last couple of years. And then recently in November, I moved over to become a full-time senior CSM. So I've worked with thousands of sales organizations over the last couple of years, and I've seen a lot of different problems, both pre-sale and post-sale Atrium. So really excited to get your questions and understand what you are joining for. So looks like we have some folks. Does anybody want to volunteer where they're calling in from, what company you're calling in from, and something that you're hoping to learn on this office hours? Excellent. Love Nova Scotia. Ralph, do you have any, that's quite the time change too, early afternoon for you. Do you have any things that you're really looking to get from this office hours takeaways here, Ralph? While Ralph answers that question, I also would recommend, if you guys would like, throw in your LinkedIn into the chat, and it is great to connect with other sales leaders. And actually on that, as we're kind of waiting for folks to trickle in here, I would like to take a moment to highlight Modern Sales Pros. A lot of you are probably familiar with Modern Sales Pros, and it is one of the world's largest peer-to-peer learning groups for AEs, SDR leaders, sales ops, VPs of sales, and essentially it is a great resource to learn from your peers. So there's no selling to each other. It's invite only. If you're interested, Hannah will drop the invite link into the chat, and then just select Carson as your referral here. Let's jump over to some of these questions here in the ramp. Michelle, love Volta. I actually sold to your team when I was working on the sales side of things. So you guys have an incredible office in the dog patch. So love to see that you're reconstructing some of the sales process and onboarding. We'll go through that. Let's see, Mike, Sacramento, excellent. One of my favorite spots to golf in. Casey, Salt Lake, that's, I'm actually in Texas now, but normally I live in Wyoming, and that's my favorite big city to drive down to since it's only 4 hours away. And looking to track changes in specific charts over time. Great, that's exactly what we're going to cover here. Let's see, Ralph, just a better understanding of leveraging Atrium for performance. Love that, easy. New Zealand, excellent, Joe. Well, thank you for taking the time to call in. New Zealand, I'm a huge trout fisherman, so New Zealand is on my to-do list for coming for like lifetime bucket trips. I'd love to catch some of those fish. Sight fishing in New Zealand is great. And excellent, Joe. I love that. That's funny. Yeah, I obviously couldn't afford a house in Jackson Hole because I'm not kin to Elon Musk, but I'm about an hour south of Jackson. My parents still live up there, so it's great. For all those folks just trickling in, I'll go ahead and just reintroduce myself. My name is Carson, and senior CSM here at Atrium, doing Atrium ramping better, faster, stronger. I think we're pretty much ready to jump in. So, you know, intro about me, worked on the sales side of things for about 2.5 years, really helping define Atrium's sales motion. And then I moved over to the customer success team, where I've been helping our success motion, if you will. So have a great perspective of pre-sale and post-sale Atrium, what companies are struggling with. So really excited to get your questions, get you in here. And if you just joined recently, check out the MSP link that I posted above, because it's a great, as our host said, 25,000 strong community of sales leaders. So without much ado, we're going to go ahead and jump in. And I do want to just reiterate, there's no such thing as a stupid question here. I have literally heard it all. They're all good questions. Ramping is really tough. And that's why we're in office hours, is for this continuous learning. So if you think that you have a question, I would bet dollars to donuts that one of your peers on this call has the same question. So please don't feel free, or please please feel free and don't hesitate to ask any of those questions. Our awesome behind the scenes moderator, Hannah, who is just incredible, will triage them to me. So jumping into the agenda here, we've done kind of welcomes and intros. I've got a little bit of background in slides and context setting that we'll go into to understand why ramping is hard, how to actually think about ramping that's a little bit differently than what we maybe normally do. We've got some ramping examples in Atrium to talk through from, we're essentially going to go strategically, hey, how do we think about ramping, all the way down to tactically, how do we instrument ramping in Atrium or outside of Atrium. We've got some good Q&A, and then we have an amazing slew of helpful resources we're going to send to you after the call in order to get things going. So, when we think about the companies that I've worked with in the past and that have struggled, it's interesting because even very data-centric companies like Figma and Zuora, Bluecore, Ironclad, these folks are all folks that are Atrium customers and that have really strong BI offerings and BI teams. And even in a Tableau or a Microsoft Power BI, it's difficult to not only understand what metrics we want to track during ramp, but then figure out how to consistently and efficiently track those metrics without asking the business and data team to do hours upon hours of number crunching week over week to continuously update the data. So this is why figuring out ramp is so important, because even some of the most sales focused companies still need help with this. And so if we think about where we can spend time as a leader, the most valuable point, whether it's from an SDR or from an AE standpoint, is going to be investing in the success of our new hires. And I would say on the flip side of that, one of the quickest ways to squander some of that great new funding money that you have got is by having a hiring class that is ramping poorly. We don't hit our sales targets, and then all of a sudden we're scrambling to figure out what are we going to do because we're over budget and we're under bookings numbers. So when we think about ramp from a strategic standpoint, it kind of all starts with why is measuring ramp important? And I think when I talk to a lot of companies, they're like, well, I measure ramp. I want my SDRs to create, 2 ops their first month, 3 ops their second month, and then be fully ramped to 4 ops their third month. But really, how can we get more specific than just output goals, and why is that important? And why is that so hard to do? And where do we even start with this? And then we'll get into really what metrics we can start to measure this ramp. So if we think about a visualization, this is really helpful to understand why ramp is important in the first place. So this is, on the x-axis, we have time to get to full productivity, whether it's from an AE or an SDR. And essentially, if we don't start looking, we have training for the rep in this white space, and this green area is really where we want to start to understand the metrics that are important for the success of a ramp. Because if we see that a rep, as their time in seat goes on, are missing where they should be in terms of getting to final productivity, well, then by the time they're at full productivity, if they're missing their output goals like bookings or like ops created, we then don't understand why, and we have to work backwards, and we're already several months behind. So if we define the precursor metrics, which we'll get into on the next slide here, that are important for understanding what's going to make a ramp successful, then we can keep an eye on those leading indicators. When those leading indicators start to trail off in this yellow area, we know where to coach, and it's much easier to get to full productivity without having to backtrack and without having to backtrack and say, hey, where do we need to focus to have these bookings get more in line? So when we think about breaking the output goals of an SDR or an AE up into the individual ramping components, we can visualize it through what we like to call the metrics tree or the bookings formula or output formula. So the way to think about this is really down at the bottom. So in order to get to pipeline generated is just the amount of pipe value times the ops accepted, and then ops accepted are made up of the acceptance rate times the number of ops that are submitted. And as we continue to move from left to right on this slide, we can see that we break these components up into their individual values. Sorry about that. My Apple mouse loves to switch slides on me. So pipeline value is essentially like, hey, what's the ASP on the ops that we're sourcing? What's the win rate on those ops that we're sourcing? How about when we break ops into quality? So what is the number of contacts we're touching per account? How many touches are we touching per account in a time frame? What is our email engagement rate? What does our talk time look like? So, a lot of people I've spoken with think sales is an art form. And I totally agree with that. As a lifelong seller, sales is definitely an art. Where I disagree with folks is when they think that that art is magic and can't be quantified. And this is how we start to quantify this. So when we think about metrics that we want to start to measure in RAMP for AEs or SDRs, we can start to look at these drivers, or what Atrium calls leading indicators, to understand, hey, if the number of connects or if the number of contacts touched per account or talk time is low in this beginning area or in this yellow area, we'll know that it's going to lead to an output problem in the future. And this is how we can start to really fine tune the metrics that we are both looking at in Atrium and then subsequently coaching on to get better rep performance. So switching from, and again, feel free if any of this conceptually, if you have any questions on specific metrics here, on metrics you've been using, if they're good, on if this is different than how you think about RAMP, please drop that into the Q&A section and we can talk through that. So when we flip to an AE side of things, the bookings, this is essentially the bookings formula. Bookings are made up of your wins. Your wins are made up of your win rate times attempts times your average sales price divided by your average deal cycle. And when we break these components up into their leading indicators, we start to get a much more nuanced feel for exactly what we want to measure. So things like how many contacts are we touching per account? You'll see that that's also important for AEs. How much ops are we moving through the stages? Are ops getting stuck in any stage? How much time is each op spending in each stage? How many untouched ops and email engagement rate? I want to take a moment and call out the link that Hannah just posted in the chat. We have two guides that are live right now, SDR and AE metrics inspections guides. They are essentially this presentation juiced up on some, juice, I guess, steroids. And that will really help tell you what metrics we should be looking at in RAMP. So click that link, grab that resource. It's really helpful. But to summarize, before we start getting into the tactical implementation of these metrics, really, pardon me one second. Really, the takeaway here is a lot of times we think that we just need to measure bookings or op creation. However, by breaking those outputs into their component pieces, we can get specific metrics that we can then measure in Atrium or outside of Atrium to understand the quality of a ramp throughout the ramping process. So if we take a look at what metrics we want to start working on for SDRs, I like to start with a crawl, walk, run situation. So really looking at the most fundamental metrics that are going to make an SDR successful, starting to coach on those, and then adding more metrics that are maybe encompass more nuances of your sales motion as we continue to go. So I think the first, so I like to break metrics down into a weekly, monthly, and quarterly cadence. Because SDRs have such a fast sales motion and are usually very velocity, I like to see calls and emails, so high activity in the week. And I also like to see first touches. This includes new accounts touched. This includes new contacts touched. This includes overall accounts that you're touching in your cadence, overall contacts that you're touching in your cadence. So we can really see on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis, is there any of these leading indicators we talked about on slide 7 that are being dropped and that we can focus coaching on? On a monthly cadence, I really like to look at meetings created and opportunities created. So this is more of your output goals. And then on the quarterly basis, we've got some more qualitative things like, hey, we want to make sure that the ops that our SDRs are creating are quality enough to actually close bookings. So what are the bookings that the AEs are closing that are being sourced by my SDRs? What kind of pipeline are they creating? What are their conversion rates and their efficiency? So these quarterly metrics make sure we're staying within the guardrails of activity per opportunity created. So how efficient are SDRs at actually creating opportunities? How efficient are they at the converting meetings created to opportunities? Do their opportunities that they're creating convert to sales accepted? And are the accounts that they're touching converting to opportunities created? So really, the nice thing is too, all of these, I know everybody here is customers, the nice thing is all of these are already in Atrium. And I can tell you from talking with, again, hundreds of sales ops folks, these conversion rates and these booking source things are the stuff of nightmares. So to be able to like, at least to build them. So they're the stuff of dreams if we can get them continuously monitored and built. So if we have these in Atrium and we know what their value should be, it really takes like 80% of the difficult part of ramping, which is defining the ramping metrics and measuring the ramping metrics, out of the equation. So it sets you and your managers up for success to really be able to dive in and have these conversations. What we see here on the right, we'll get into this a little bit more in the actual product towards the end of the presentation, is just a screenshot of how Atrium is always looking at a rep compared to goals, a rep compared to their own historical performance, and a rep compared to themselves in order to alert you, the manager or sales ops, to where we should start focusing our coaching during ramp. Before I jump into this AE goals for ramping, we can actually look at how we set these numbers. So, staying in the SDR train, we figured out, hey, what are the types of metrics? Like, why should we be measuring these drivers? What are the specific drivers that we want to measure? And then we get into how do we come up with the number of these KPIs, the level that these KPIs ought to be set at. And honestly, I would say each one of these steps can be a pretty large stumbling point for organizations. Feel free to check out the goal. We on our website, Hannah can link them, link the resource. We actually have a spreadsheet here. All of these links here actually link to Atrium. This is a screenshot of the spreadsheet, but these links link into Atrium. And so the way that we use this is we say, okay, cool. If I'm an SDR leader and I know that my SAOs required per month, my goal per person is 8, what are the different activities that need to go into that based off of our company's historical conversion rates? So we essentially put in our goal here. We click this SAO acceptance rate card. That's going to take us to the conversion rate from ops created to sales accepted ops. 70% is excellent. I usually see, depending on the industry, anywhere from 50 to 80%. I would say if your SDRs are creating opportunities that are converting at less than a 50% rate to sales accepted, we probably have a qualitative issue and we want to dive into that. Reach out to your Atrium CSM or take a look at some of our ramping resources to understand where we might be able to start to dig in to look at quality pieces, but I digress slightly. So we get our SAO acceptance rate from Atrium, and that's going to tell us, hey, based off of the number of SAOs that convert based off of the number of ops that convert to SAO, this is the number of raw ops created that we need to make. Depending on whether or not your SDRs create an opportunity every time they create a meeting, we'll also put in the meeting conversion rate. So how often does a meeting created turn into an op? That will start to get us a rough idea of output on a monthly basis. So we need to create 11 and a half or 12 ops per month. If our meetings are converting at a 70% acceptance rate, we need to be setting 16.3 of them. So this is where we use your own team's historical performance that we find through Atrium to tell us if we are on track to hit our SAOs required per month. We can continue to back into this by looking at the number of accounts that an SDR touches that convert to an opportunity. I think 3% is right around average here. I'd say if you pull up this metric and this is less than 0.5% or less than like 0.3%, again, probably a qualitative issue. 3% is a little on the high side, and then 5% is, you are crushing your account conversions. This metric here will tell us how many accounts we need to touch to create one sales accepted opportunity. So if we think about this, this is essentially saying, hey, for this team, 3 accounts out of every 100 that they touch end up turning into an SAO. And so in order to instrument this, we put in a quarterly goal of SAO to account touch conversion rate of 3% to make sure that we stay within our guidelines. And this spreadsheet tells us that at that conversion rate, reps should be touching at least 267 unique accounts per month. So again, I know that this math is a little bit theoretical when we're going through on the spreadsheet. I really recommend popping open that link that Hannah dropped in the chat, because it's all really self-explanatory. You can make a copy of the spreadsheet so you can have scratch paper. And again, it's just clicking these links and putting in the numbers from Atrium, and these beige slots is what we're going to set goals on. So when we look at how we get to these accounts touched, so what we've done is we said, okay, based off of our output, here's how many ops we need to create, here's how many meetings we need to create, and here's how many accounts we need to touch at this conversion rate to get to this output. And now what we'll do is we'll look at the number of emails it takes to create one opportunity and the number of calls it takes to create one opportunity in order to back into those activity numbers. So now on a weekly basis, we know that it takes 100 emails to create one opportunity. So reps should be sending roughly 266 emails per week, doing 266 calls per week to 267 unique accounts per month. And as long as they are at this 3% conversion rate, we should be seeing our goals be hit by reps. And this is how we start to figure out what goals we want to track. We instrument those goals on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis. And then Atrium will tell us which numbers we should look, what the levels of those goals are. And when somebody is divergent from those levels, we then can say, great, we need to start looking at your conversion rate. Let's look at qualitative metrics, or we need to start looking at your activity. Why are you so low on emails created? So we're about to jump into this for the SDR or for the AE side of things, very similar, but please, again, reach out to your Atrium CSM, drop questions in the Q&A, join MSP, check out the resources for the ramping calculator here, because I love that you're all here and listening to me, but I heard a stat that you need to hear something 8 times before it really sets in. And I can tell you goals during ramp are maybe some of the most challenging data-driven sales management stuff you can do. So I want to make sure that this session is actually impactful in the long term, and we don't get done with it and say, oh, Thursday afternoon, especially in New Zealand, let's go grab a pint. So please let us know if you have any questions on this. So from here, we jump over to the same thing for AEs. This is honestly very similar with a slightly different set of metrics that we're using. So when we think about this, the cadence here is to review this in our weekly one-on-ones. I didn't mention that from the SDR standpoint, but this is something that you're going to bring up with reps in their one-on-ones. On a weekly cadence for AEs, I really like meetings on calendar. So as a refresher, Atrium actually syncs to your calendar system, whether it's Outlook or Gmail, your email system, as well as your Salesforce system. So we don't require AEs to take an extra step. Oh, Friday morning. Great. Well, yeah, of course, Joel. Thanks for joining. Please skip the pint and then have one for me in the evening here, maybe my Thursday end of day. We'll make sure to send you all of these resources here, and really appreciate you joining. Have a great one, Joel. So thinking about these AE goals, our meetings on calendar is a really powerful tool to understand, are our AEs even doing anything? I love working from home, but I will also say it's easy to get distracted. So by having an integration with the Google Calendar where we can read customer-facing meetings will give us an idea. Are we engaging prospecting activities with new reps? Are we engaging, or with new companies? Are we engaging existing accounts with new companies? Or I'm sorry, are we engaging with our existing ops with meetings? Because at the end of the day, it's almost inarguable that a future meeting on the calendar is a very strong leading indicator that you want to continue the buying process. If you as a prospect won't commit to a 15-minute meeting after at the end of the meeting that we're on, there's a good chance you're not serious about buying. So I really like to look at meetings on calendar during the week. When we think about accounts that we're touching, this can be both prospecting and existing accounts. So we want to make sure that we're working our existing opportunities that are in pipe. And if your reps are responsible for prospecting, we want to ensure that they're touching new accounts. And are those new accounts that we're touching actually leading to ops being created? And conversely, are our SDR teams feeding enough ops into the AE's pipe to set them up for success? On a monthly cadence, I really like to measure new pipeline added and opportunities advanced. So new pipeline added is going to ensure that we don't come up to a pipeline pocket in 1 to 3 months and we don't have anything to close. And obviously, we can't close things if opportunities are not moving down the funnel. Depending on the velocity of your sales motion, you might want to put opportunities advanced on a weekly column. I would recommend that if your sales cycle is under 30 days. If your sales cycle is anything above 30 days, we probably just want to stick to opportunities advanced on a monthly cadence. And then on the quarterly cadence, we have bookings, win rate. I also like to look at additional qualitative metrics, things like average sales price, time and stage for our crucial stages, conversion rates between stages to make sure that reps are not losing deals at any point in the funnel, and then untouched ops and deal cycle time to make sure everybody is within roughly the same line. I know all of these metrics aren't listed here, but again, I want to plug the resources that Hannah is putting in the chat, because that is going to get into much more in-depth substantiality, I guess, in-depth information into the specific metrics that you'll want to set. Again, and here on the right-hand side, we have a screenshot of Atrium essentially showing us what this looks like from a ramping standpoint. We'll get into this more in the platform here shortly. So when we jump over to the AE productivity, this actually is also a calculator similar to the SDR calculator. Go ahead and grab it from the resources page. Pardon me if I sound like a broken record. Give me 1 second, please. Like I said, I'm a little nervous. This is my first webinar and a little dry mouth. So we'll spin through this quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide since it's very, very similar to the SDR slide, but essentially we do the exact same thing. So we take the amount of quota that we have, we click these links in Atrium to get our sales historicals for average selling price, for win rate, for SAOs, and then we set these. Thank you guys so much. And then we set these beige pieces as our goal. So we say, hey, if we want a quarterly quota, well, we know we need to get an average selling price of 25,000 at a win rate of 25%, at a 75% op acceptance rate to get to our quarterly quota. And then will also tell us kind of the new ops and new pipeline needed per month. I do too. It's amazing. Thank you guys so much. You're going to make me get all big-faced emoji like Hannah just put, big-eyed emoji. So I think the key takeaway here is there's times I've worked with customers and we put in their average selling price and we put in their win rate and their quota, and the math doesn't add up. Reach out to your CSM if you're going through this and it says that, hey, your rep is not necessarily going to hit the quota, because that's where we start to figure out what metrics we can coach on, because we might not be pacing to hit quota. And that's the most important thing here, is using our historical performance to understand if the quota is actually achievable in the future. So before we jump into the product here, I just want to go ahead and plug our future office hours since everyone is having such a great time here on Thursday. So on March 24th, we are doing a internal meetings one-on-one pipe reviews forecasting. So really a great follow-up to Atrium. Let's set some goals in Ramp. And then this next office hours is going to be how do we use these goals? We've got creating a data-driven culture because let's face it, not everyone wants to use data as much as folks on the call because we're like, we want to spend our time learning more about data. And I love that. But I've also found not everyone in your org is going to be like that. So how can we help spread this throughout the org? And then how do we take data-driven into prospecting excellence? So really some awesome future office hours that are coming up. So now we get to the good stuff. So let's jump into Atrium and see what this looks like. So if we come over to the dashboard here, what we're looking at is an AE dashboard. This is actually Atrium's internal dashboard that we use for for measuring the ramp of new AEs. And let me just dive into here real quick to one of these slides to tell everyone what's going on. So when we're sales managers, what we're looking at here is the opportunities created metric. So this is an important metric for our new AEs since we want to teach prospecting in addition to being fed by our SDRs. Obviously, pretty important. When I'm a new manager and I see somebody like Queen Grimhilde has only created 12 new ops, well, I can ask myself, and it's kind of hard to answer. I know, Michelle, I think these are all Disney character names. I'm not a parent myself, but maybe the parents in the chat who have a little bit more time with Disney movies will recognize some of these characters. I don't know any of these names. But the question that's hard as a sales manager to answer is my rep struggling with, for instance, opportunities created because they're new, or is it because they need coaching? And this is such a crucial question to answer because we don't want to coach somebody who's actually doing well, and we don't want to ignore somebody who really needs coaching because when they get to their month 6, they're going to be in trouble. So what we do here is Atrium normalizes all of the start dates in a rep's ramp so we can actually look at everybody's first year normalized into their months. And so what we can see here is Queen Grimhilde is actually low in the new ops that she's creating relative to the peers that started at the same time as her, Flunky the Baboon, General Hologram, Jane Porter, and she's actually petering out a little bit. So this is where we would want to make sure Queen Grimhilde is really focusing on creating ops because she's low not only compared to the people that started at the same time as her, but she's also low compared to people who are already ramped. And I think this is really important. You know, we look at Jackson Hopscotch, and you know, I know internally Jackson Hopscotch is a rep that we want to pattern after. So if Jackson Hopscotch had a really high success rate in her first year, how do we then make sure that Queen Grimhilde has that same success? Well, we look at these ramping metrics and we make sure that she is in band when it comes to ramp. So I know this can be a little confusing, so please ping the questions if you have any questions on what's going on here. But essentially, this is how we start to visually monitor these metrics. So as you see, this ramping dashboard is really just a culmination of all of the metrics that we looked at on the slides. So what kind of ops were we creating during our ramping 12 months? And then we have the trailing 12 months. So as you see, this is 12 months previous to March 3rd. This is the normalized first year of reps tenure. We can do the same thing in activity. So we can say, okay, what kind of accounts are my reps engaging when it comes to their ramp? And again, if we look in here, continuing to use Queen Grimhilde as an example, she's actually touching quite a few accounts. So this is where we would start to think about a qualitative coaching piece for her, since obviously she has high activity, but she's not necessarily creating ops. So is she working with existing accounts? Is her prospect messaging off? And again, we can start to get a picture of, instead of just saying, Queen Grimhilde, your ops are low, do we even know that her ops are low? Well, we answer that question. Now we know her ops are low, and we want to start to ask ourselves why. What are you doing with your time that could be better? So we see that she is engaging accounts. We would want to make sure, is the accounts that she's engaging efficient and worthwhile? If we continue to scroll down, we have some basic email metrics. We can see Queen is actually a little bit lower here. than the rest of the team. So this might be, if we look at some of these other reps that are doing quite a bit of prospecting here, we might want to say, hey, listen, you're touching some good accounts. Maybe you want to touch more accounts with more emails, or touch those accounts more frequently. That's a good point. If you don't have a killer dashboard set up, we can whip one of these up faster than my grandmother could whip up a batch of her delicious peanut butter cookies. So please reach out to me, reach out to your CSM. They'd be more than happy to help you get this set up. So really, I don't want to continue to beat a ramped horse here, but essentially the key is having these Exactly. The key is having these normalized charts here, which is so difficult to set up, so we can compare apples to apples. And the rest is honestly pretty much butter, right? We're just going through and we're looking at all of the metrics that are important that we outlined in the slides. This is disco reached for ramping. So this is a really important stage for our AEs. We want to make sure that their ops are moving beyond discovery. And it's like Queen Grimhilde looks pretty good. So qualitatively, the ops that we're creating are advancing. So that's good. We're just not creating enough of them. Whereas Flunky is not flunking. He is really excelling. So this is, again, I know it's a lot of information, but when we take the crawl, walk, run approach that we went through in the slides, we define the metrics that are important, we have these dashboards built, it becomes really easy to visually double check these metrics. And the really incredible thing about Atrium is that we don't even have to visually double check these metrics. And that's why I love this program so much, because Atrium is looking at all of these ramping metrics all of the time and is letting you know where we should be concerned. So in this case, we are looking at an AE ramping feed. So this alert feed is going to take all of the information that you would have to visually monitor on the dashboard, and it's doing that for you. It's like, hey, we know that Max the sheepdog is missing their down funnel ops goal here. So Max the sheepdog is ramping. We have a goal to have 5 to 9 ops in our down funnel stage, and they're missing this goal. And I don't think you need to have a doctorate in modern selling to understand that if we don't have down funnel ops, we are not going to be able to close anything. Let's see, do we have a list of the metrics card you use? Yes, we do, Michelle. So that's a great question. I believe all of those metrics are listed in that ramping or in those metrics guide, the SDR ramping metrics inspection guide and the AE ramping metrics inspections guide. So I jumped a little bit ahead and got into my Q&A questions first time, but yes, Michelle, that is correct. We do have a list of metrics and we'll send those through as a resource afterwards. Awesome. So really straightforward. And the nice thing again here is we don't have to look at the number of opportunities Max owns, do the math to say, oh, he should have 9, he has 2, that's too low. Atrium's feeding it to us. Atrium is feeding us that information. Again, really important. I would say time is the most valuable resource anybody on this call has. And so that's why these ramping alert feeds are so important. And again, if we continue to scroll through here, we can see it's an AE team for all of the crucial metrics that we care about. And we're just saying, hey, compared to existing ramping employees, Carl the robot is not touching enough new accounts. He's not touching enough accounts in general. So this is where we start to use these to dive into how to increase activity, how to increase quality, and really if it's activity or quality that are the problems. So I think that is pretty much everything I wanted to cover here. I think the last piece that is really nice that I'll actually just improv a little bit is this goals section. And the nice thing is here, Atrium's got a full goals tab where we can set goals for these ramping metrics. So we don't have to necessarily look at the dashboard and we don't have to rely on the alert feed, although the alert feed is chef's kiss. We can come down here and look at FAT's team and say, how is my team doing? And as you can see on a quarterly basis, we've got kind of our qualitative metrics, our monthly basis, we've got our output metrics, and then our weekly basis we have on our activity metrics. And the incredible thing is Atrium actually will automatically prorate these, let's see, where is, Atrium will automatically prorate these goals in ramp. So we have a lot of flexibility for fully automated prorated goals. So you just set the goals for your fully ramped rep, and based off of our experience of working within the industry, we will prorate those based off of the role and the job type. So you don't have to do anything. You put in the output goals of a fully ramped rep, we do everything else. We've got an in-between option here where you put in the fully ramped goals and we won't alert you when a rep is off, but you can still go ahead and measure their performance. And then we have a fully customizable ramping functionality where you can essentially say, hey, I know the amount of activity that I want during month 1, month 2, and month 3, and we can manually set those to ensure very dialed in, very specific goals for our reps. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to cover here. What questions do we have? What things were tough that we want to talk through here? Well, you guys go ahead and think through this. I've got a out of season dad joke that I can tell. What sound does a witch make when she takes off? Broom, broom. Ha ha. So I think some questions that I run up against while we're waiting for some, do we have a dashboard to help diagnose and track AE outbound efforts? Yes, absolutely. So I don't have an example pulled up here, Amanda, but if we think about AE specific prospecting things, what I like, let me come back over here to this dashboard. What I like to do is really focus on activity and new, pardon me, I muted myself, activity and essentially new contacts and accounts. So I'm going to just go ahead and flip between metric cards here. But again, Amanda, I think you might work for Partner Stack. I think we actually worked together a couple of years ago. If I'm wrong, good question. Oh, love that. So reach out to your CSM if you don't have this on a dashboard. They can help you set this up. I'm just going to flip through cards as an example here. So inbound and outbound activity is a little bit trickier depending on how you guys are logging in Salesforce. Inbound, outbound gets a little bit tough. From a higher level, when we're just looking at prospecting activity, I really like to look at things like new. So anything that's new. So what kind of new contacts are we touching? And then the nice thing is we can get in here on, so new contacts, are we adding new contacts to our sequences? And then what about new accounts? Whoops, my fingers are a little fat this morning. There we go, new accounts touched. So are we touching new accounts? And again, we're still on this ramping view, so we can see how many new accounts, new AEs are coming in while they're prospecting. Additionally, we have filters available. So when we want to, and this is not going to be perfect, Amanda, but if we want to estimate outbound versus inbound, we can actually say, all right, let's look at the new accounts that we're touching that do not have an open opportunity. So this is a pretty good approximation for when an AE is touching a new account that they did not get with an opportunity already attached. So this is really nice to say, okay, cool. Well, how many new accounts are we touching that, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We'll get into that in just a second. So how many new accounts are we touching that don't have activity? So this is a way to approximate essentially outbound activity. And then once that outbound activity manifests itself into an opportunity, we can actually look at opportunities created. And then we can go ahead and actually click. And if we look at, if we group this by none, so as a quick refresher, this is where we split Atrium into different time frames. And if we group this by none, we can then subdivide the graph by opportunity source. So this will show us, hey, was this an AE self-sourced op? Was this an external referral? This is obviously mapped on a per customer basis, so you might have a different mapping source, but we can map to your op source here. Love that, Amanda. Again, if you have any additional questions, please reach out to your CSM and we can get this dialed in for you. So I think that's a good summary there. Any other questions that people had that they want to jump in here after I answered Amanda's question? Awesome. Well, I love that, folks. This was excellent. I think we're going to wrap up here. So I'll just go ahead and beat the drum one more time. Check out all of the resources that we're going to send through in the follow-up. So we've got a lot of metrics inspections guides. We've got a lot of helpful step-by-step play-by-plays. And don't be afraid to join the MSP crew if you're not a member, and to reach out to us, because we are here to make sure that we're partnered with you for success in not just software, but in your sales motion and in your sales training. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday and a great rest of your week. And I hope to work with everyone in the future. Thanks, guys.